So this is a book about, it's a book that is based on my being a daughter-in-law of the Vietnamese diaspora for about 30 years. And what happens is it is sort of a rags to riches story of a Mekong Delta boy who becomes a venture capitalist in Singapore, and he goes through America. And it's also a sort of a conflict story about a man who resented the Americans invading the country and then went with the Viet Cong and then regretted his participation with the Viet Cong after they won. And so it's a story about conflicts. And this part here with the credit card is when he is in America. And so I read you this. There's a full moon. It's mid-autumn again. But it's 30 years later, and you've left your father, your blood father, the laughing-eyed young man, your tutor, and all there was behind now. You've sorted out your allegiances, you believe. You followed your yellow kite across the ocean. You've arrived in America. In America, the autumn moons are bigger. In America, you have a house in expensive Laguna Canyon with a garage and a linkway joining the two, on which you can perch, and from which you can watch the moon and its reflection in your swimming pool. In America, the air outside is fresh, not overladen with the stench of shit rising from the sewers like Saigon, where you went to live after you set aside the commander and his mad dreams of glory, where you met once more the man with the laughing eyes who set you on the path you have been walking ever since. You breathe in the California air, scented with mesquite and sage. It's not the lemongrass and ginger of a Delta courtyard, but if your father, the chief clerk, was sitting here with you, how pleased he would be with this holding. The house and its garage, the garden, the pool. Even if there's no ancestral altar in the living room, no Ong Tao in the kitchen, he would be proud. See? Credit card. American credit card. Yes.
So what's so special about this credit card?
Oh no, this is just a Wells Fargo credit card. Yes, it's Wells Fargo's the American West, the Great Open. If you are an American, the first thing that you feel if you're Vietnamese arrived in America, you feel you've made it if you've got a credit card. Yes, maybe you want to give the box to the next person.
Right.
Yes, please put them back. They're my very dear mementos.
Wow. This was it's got a photo in.
You can choose either the photo or the bank book.
Some kind of a passport, is it?
It's a bank book.
Oh, it's a bank book, okay. Well, there you go.
Well,
Let's go up
okay.
inside.
Yeah, you want the photo or the bank book? What do you want to know about?
Oh,
You get to choose.
okay, the bank book.
The bank book, all right. The bank book actually is a memento that it is a bank book from pre-1975 Vietnam. And when the communists took over, what happened was that they changed the money. So everything that you owned became nothing. And I use this bank book as an intro into a section that I have about how the character, who actually wanted very much for the Viet Cong to win, how he contrasts his life before and after the takeover, and the change in his material circumstances. It was an older sister's and oldest brother-in-law's well-provisioned house that you spent your high school years. In that house, down an alley in Saigon's District 3, oldest brother-in-law had first persuaded you to taste the wonders churned out by his cook, French charcuterie, explosive northern gunpowder pickles made from fermented baby eggplants, southern grilled quails and other exotic birds, and an uncountable variety of dumplings and cakes from Imperial Hui. It was from that house that oldest brother-in-law ushered all of the members of the household, you, Locke, whom, your older sister, her 5 children, and the maids, into the fleet of American-donated police cars at his disposal, and ferried you all to the city's best air-conditioned theater to enjoy the delights of Hollywood movies. It was in the dining room of that house during the first debt of liberation that you were forcefully reminded how badly you'd repaid that corrupt and cruel man's generosity to you. You were 28 that New Year. As always, you ate kou gua, bitter gourd, for the dead reunion dinner, so bitterness would pass you by. That year, the kou gua was so sharp, older sister was convinced bitterness would pass all of you by, not just for the next 12 months, but for many years to come. She had simmered it plain in water. The meat, just the ½ kilogram you brought home from work, had to be set aside for the obligatory New Year stew. Sugar couldn't be found in the markets to make candied offerings, not even for the price of gold. You didn't have enough money for boiled head cheese or saucissons. All your savings had been converted. Not once, but twice. Your total stock of paper money turned in, and each adult given 200 new Vietnamese dong in exchange. It was just enough for a week of Russian barley or 6 bowls of good white rice for your Tet dinner meant for 7. So that's what this bag book is about. You can take the picture and leave it outside, I think.
So tell them more about this character and how that relates. Who's that cruel man you speak of, and why are they living a life of poverty?
Well, the cruel man is actually the oldest brother-in-law of the character, and the oldest brother-in-law of the character is the person with one of the people with whom the character lived when he was a teenager. He lived in the house, and the oldest brother-in-law was a sort of corrupt police chief, so he supported the character. But this guy is very important in the story, but spoiler, because he has actually, and the clue is, of course, it says, it was in the dining room that you were forcefully reminded how badly you'd repaid that corrupt and cruel man's generosity to you. If they're corrupt and cruel and you don't repay their generosity well, they're apt to get very angry. And that's something that happens at the end of the book, but I'm not going to tell you. Yes?
So it's a multi-layered story, a character.
Yes.
Tell them more about the main character. He has many
The character, okay. Well, in Tong Trans, Vietnam, everyone is at war and no one is who they seem. But he has a conflicted heart that needs a home, and he yearns for a true father and a cause to give himself to. So he chooses independence, liberty, and happiness. This is a man with 3 fathers. And maybe I should read that paragraph just so people get an idea.
So now we're bringing to the story and telling you generally. So we've actually had the card, so you know that it's eventually he moves to America and he tries to make life for himself, a life that he wishes. But now we're just going back and seeing why was it so hard to get that life he truly wanted, and was it a life he truly wanted at the end of the day? So now we're going to that.
Well, actually, I'm just going to tell you that he is a man with 3 fathers. And because he's a man with 3 fathers, and they all have differing political loyalties, and he chooses the Viet Cong, and then he ends up in America. Then the Viet Cong take away all his money, which is a bank book, and he ends up in America with a US credit card. So it's an adventure of a life, really. But at the end, what are his true loyalties? So this is the beginning. You have his confession at last. The story on sheets of onion skin as crisp as rice paper. There was a full moon, a harvest moon. There were 2 frightened girls listening behind the wooden door. There were men shouting from beyond the raggedy fence overgrown with bitter gourd, lemongrass, and peppers. Quick, finish with it, or we'll be late for the rendezvous with the new commander. And I was there lifting myself off her, stealing a sideways look. She was tiny and very pretty, even with her eyes red from crying and her mouth swollen from my kisses. And I regretted it, what I'd done. But we were at war, and her father had to be taught a lesson. I pulled on my trousers, tied the drawstrings, and ran out. Ready, I said to the unit leader, my eyes downcast. Then I hoisted my French carbine across my back and stuck my elbows out to keep my marching companions at bay. I didn't want them too close, rubbing against me with their sweat-stained arms and smelly bodies. I needed to be alone, to savor the memory of her lithe brown body under mine, the fruity smell of her thick black hair, and the feel of her teeth like pearls against my tongue. The man in front of me joked, "A little tiger?" The man behind said, "We all heard her." They chimed together. "You tamed her though, didn't you? Was she good in the end?" they asked, their curiosity overcoming restraint. I looked away. There was nothing to be ashamed about. Still, it was my first time. I was sorry for myself, and for her it had happened this way. And on a mid-autumn night too. It wasn't what my father had raised me to do, even if she had melted into me at the end, sighed with completeness, and allowed me to take away her circlet of bone to remember her by. Can we show the circlet of bone? This one is not a circlet of bone. This is how the circle is supposed to look like. You know he liked to embroider. He couldn't have told the truth if he wanted to. So accustomed was he to double and triple dealing. You know how like him you are. But it's never too late to rid yourself of delusion. There's a circlet you carry close to your heart, a memento from someone who knew you the instant you were made, an oracle bone that knows. In its silence is your story. And that's the story.
That's a really
You can choose something else now. Oh, this, yes. This is a shell case. And really, it's a shell case. It's an empty one. And at the top it says Quyết thắng, which means we are determined to win. And this book, of course, is about the Vietnam War. So I read you a part about the war. On Friday afternoon, you came back to your desk to find a slim envelope on top of the clearing schedules. Inside was a note asking you to leave the fuel depot's keys out overnight. Fuel prices were sky high, and you just awarded a tender to one of Ju Hai's friends. This is just before the Vietnam War ends, okay? You assumed the friend needed to tap some fuel. You left the keys out as instructed without a second thought and hopped into your pickup to go to Locke's and Hurl's for dinner. You had made a mental note to go in early the next day to adjust the fuel meters so no one would guess the tanks had been tapped. But you didn't think to tell the night guard to go off duty. The young boy from a small hamlet west of Nha Trang was dozing in front of the fuel tanks when the sappers crept in. He was a very good guard, a light sleeper, his colleagues told you later. But he had no chance against the half a dozen men who overpowered him, knocked him unconscious, and then set the station on fire. You were across town with Locke, barbecuing cuttlefish to go with your beer when you heard the explosions. It was 1974. The communists had just sabotaged the main oil facility near Saigon and burnt up 14 million liters of gasoline. The Americans had cut the country's aid again. World oil prices were sky high. It didn't surprise you the neighborhood guerrillas executed a copycat action. But if you'd been less careless, if you'd taken the young guard off duty, he need not have died. You would not be looking at a boy-shaped patch of stickiness on the blackened floor of the station when you went to inspect the damage later that night. Whoa. Boy-shaped patch of stickiness.
Yep. You want to say anything first before we...
Anyone want to ask, say
Or you put the
anything?
shelves? Yeah, I think it speaks for itself. Just the tangible
It
nature
says,
of war.
Quýt Thang determined to win a boy-shaped patch of stickiness. Yeah. Suzanne, you guys have read, you don't get. You get last, Suzanne.
Alright.
A Bloomberg. Ah.
Okay, Bloomberg anyway.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, remember I said this is a rags to riches story of a Mekong Delta boy, who becomes a venture capitalist in Singapore. And what happens is that, although he lives in America, he finds that actually Vietnam is home. So in the later part of his life, he has to return to Vietnam to confront his goals. And while he's there, he ends up doing a lot of deals. Now, I didn't make these deals up. I have lived as a member of the Vietnamese diaspora for 30 years. And there's a lot of business out of Singapore that is done with Vietnam. So I just read you a section of what some of that business fictionalized might look like. This is the hero, Tong, and he's with his friend Lee, who is a fat Chinese businessman who's very interested in money and very clever. So Lee looks around the brand new boardroom you're both in and turns to a pile of papers on the conference table, the draft announcements for the listing of the bank. Here, take a look at these for me and tell me if we need to make any corrections, he says, passing them over to you. You slap the announcements back down on the table. What's the point of building all this up if our children aren't interested in taking it over? What have we been working and struggling for all these years? Lee ignores the tantrum. In the beginning, we did it to survive, later to give our children all the good things we thought they should have, and in part to do what we could for our countrymen. Now, because we have nothing better to do that's more profitable or easier, he says. But I only have the one son, you tell your friend. All the more reason you shouldn't get bogged down by his doings. You have no diversification. It's a surefire way to heartbreak. My position is they're grown up, and fortunately or otherwise, I've given them the means to do what they want without having to worry about filling their rice bowls. My good fortune is I can occupy myself doing what I like best, building businesses. There's an expression of genuine contentment shining from his face. He motions for you to follow him into the office adjoining the boardroom. You see a new diagram on the whiteboard behind his desk. He points to it. I've noticed imports are rising much faster than exports. Soon we'll be back in a situation where everyone's scrambling for foreign exchange. So, I have this new idea for the bank and our trade financing business. What we need is a source of dollars independent of the country's ability to export. The remittances from the Vietnamese overseas. They're all sending money home under the table. Imagine how much better it would be if there were the official and secure channel. Think about a joint venture with someone like, he names a global money wire service. We keep the dollars received in the US there, payout in Vietnam from the cash flow we generate in country, and profit from the float between the pay-in and the payout dates in both currencies. He can barely keep from rubbing his fleshy hands together in glee.
What year was that? What year was that?
This would have been in about 1985, just before one of the first private joint stock banks was founded, and Western Union came into Vietnam. Yeah. So we wonder who he names a global money wire service. Yes.
So how much is fiction and how much is
Oh, it's all fiction. It's all historical fiction. So it's all history and it's all fiction, but it has to be set in a context, yes? Yeah.
Is it fiction?
It is history. It's historical fiction. There is no fat Chinese man that is real. There is no Viet Cong spy who regretted the invasion, the victory of the Viet Cong. But they're all people we know, right?
all history is somewhat fiction, right?
Yeah.
Right? So
One more. Oh,
no, there's actually 3 more.
there are 3 more. Well, Aruno has. Yeah.
You can pick one and then she will
Oh,
read
yes,
out.
yes. You have the bullet,
Yeah.
the dramatic one.
Whichever you pick.
Oh, the bangle. Oh, we've read the bangle. But no, we can read again. Yes, bangle. Yes, it's okay. It's okay. Give it to
Actually,
me.
very big.
This is a big thing. No,
Yeah,
no, give me the bangle. Big
I don't think
thing.
it's been talked about.
Where's the bangle?
Well, this one.
We'll do the bangle. Yes. No, yeah, bangle.
This one here.
Okay, later.
Alright,
We'll have both.
We'll have both.
We'll have both.
That's the
Okay.
bangle. This is special.
Oh, this is special.
That makes sense.
This is real. This is real in the sense that this bangle is what was given to me as my wedding gift from my mother-in-law. By the time I went back to Vietnam to visit my mother-in-law, she was senile and the family were very, very poor. And they actually had sold off almost everything that they owned that was gold. So this is actually beaten silver, yeah, and it's shaped like bamboo. The hero's name in the book is Tong, which is pine tree, so not exactly bamboo, but it is also another kind of tree that bends and survives despite very bad winds. So, and that bangle is made of bone. This bangle is made of silver because I think bone is hard bones, right? It's more lasting. But the bangle is actually the narrator of this story because if you remember the first part, it says, there is, and the hero wears this bangle on him all the time, like in a necklace. Because in the first part it says, there's a circlet you carry close to your heart, a memento from someone who knew you the instant you were made, an oracle bone that knows. In its silence is the story, because the bangle has been carried from the hand during the rape on one person's body, on another person's body. It's the only thing that actually knows the whole story and the mystery of the hero's origins. And of course, the bangle is there when our hero meets his wife and makes love to her for the first time. Okay, so these are my uncle. I have an uncle who reads my books, and then he always goes, there's no sex in them. He's a dirty old man. Yes. So there's also not really a lot of sex here, but on the other hand, my mother goes, this book is very pornographic. Before the first 40 pages, 2 sex scenes already. So, okay, so we go. It was the first time she'd been kissed this way, Nina confessed. It was a Vietnamese kiss, the merest brushing of your lips against hers, followed by a deep drawn-in breath against the side of her nose, as if you were absorbing her essence. It was another manifestation of your exotic otherness, what she'd been intrigued by all fortnight. She surrendered. Heftier than her, you were still slighter than anyone she'd known before. Your hairless, bronzed skin smelling faintly of incense and the sea. Your arms and legs, strong but lithe, what taut flesh there was barely covering your sharp bones, were all exciting and new for her. She was bewitched by how you carefully cupped your hands on her jawline and ran your lightly stubbled chin deliberately along her collarbone. When it came time, she received you like an emissary from a strange land, letting your otherness imprint on her in the same way the ivory circlet you'd fastened on your thigh pressed into hers. Later, she traced a finger up the length of your bent leg to your thigh, where your blood mother circlet was tied flat with a leather thong. One of my mother's wedding bangles, you said, unguarded just then and forgetful of your training. It's the remaining one of a pair my father gave her, his apology for pawning away her wedding jewelry during the Japanese occupation. By rights, it should have been buried with her when she died, but it was mislaid and they only found it later. Pawning her wedding jewelry? Why? Because my father was one of those patriotic people who, you begin to reply, not wishing to hide anything from this girl who had so impetuously opened herself to you. She leaned into your shoulder, waiting. You turned your head away. It was just the one harmless story. But once you started, where did you stop? Yeah. Then we finish with that, yeah? So good. This is the whole story is a story about a misidentity and how we don't actually see what we see because we're looking for something else, all right? And so I am going to read you some of this misidentity, that will be the mystery of who Tong is, who his father is, who his son is. Let's go and find this page. Yes. Tong is talking to his wife about the photo. You show her the picture of the man and you in the courtyard of the hotel. What do you see, you ask. Two men in a garden, Nina replies. I'd guess from the face of the older man, he's your blood father. I can't see the other face too well, but I know it's you. It's interesting that we see what we expect to, and then we edit out the rest, you say. I had that photo for years and never saw what you did until it was shoved in my face. Yes, that's me the day of my graduation in the garden of the hotel where the ceremony was held. But that's not my blood father. You pass Nina the picture of the man with the rooster. Nina picks up the picture of your fair-skinned, broad-shouldered blood father squatting with his rooster, his wide mouth opened in laughter, revealing large cigarette-stained teeth. She points to the hands holding the bird, their solid, square-tipped fingers. She examines the picture of you and the other man again. He has an open face, not what I'd expect of a spy master or a high-ranking communist, she says. She goes through the rest of the data you've presented. Same tanned skin, same slim muscular build, but he's more relaxed. His hands are loose on his belt buckle, not like yours, clenched into two fists and pulling at your suit jacket. And his eyes are different, softer and more open, not shrouded. She peers at his face again, using a finger to trace the widow's peak beginning slightly off-center of his forehead, the salt and pepper hair growing stiff and wild from it. She stares into your face and puts her finger on your forehead, at the point slightly to the left where your hairline drip dips down to meet skin. She runs her fingers through your rough hair, now streaked gray, and cups both hands around your pointed chin. But how did he, you, she asks. Yep. And you have to read the book for the rest of it. It's so confusing, isn't it? Okay.
Where was the Japanese occupation they're referring to?
The Japanese occupied Vietnam during the Second World War. They didn't really occupy it. The French were colonized Vietnam, and so the Vichy French let the Japanese in. And actually, therefore, the French were still there, but the Japanese were running things. And one of the terrible things they did was actually to requisition the rice from the Vietnamese to use as fuel, to burn, to keep what was it, the brick mills, is it, running? I can't remember.
The
The
train running.
to keep the trains running, that's right, yes. That's right, so that's when it was. And during that time, of course, the Viet Minh became very much more popular because they were the only people dealing with the problems, because Bao Dai was actually
Pro-French.
pro-French and therefore pro-Japanese. Yeah. Oh, I didn't give you anything to pick up. There's only nothing left. That's one last one.
You might as well read that one.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Are you upset? You had read the book. Okay, this is about the other father. Can I show you? Our hero is an aerospace engineer. He always likes kites, which is part of the story, and he likes airplanes. This is a picture of the hero with probably his adopted father, who would have been a French civil servant, yes. And it's very interesting because this probably would be what would have happened in the provinces, that you wouldn't even be wearing shoes and your father gets all dressed up to take a picture, you know, with his sort of French clothes, yeah. And so, you were 8 when he came home to Bạc Liêu, to the yellow stuccoed government house, still surrounded by the fence, overgrown with bitter gourd, lemongrass, and peppers, where you lived with your adopted father, the chief clerk. You had a foot over the stone threshold. He was sitting at the dining table, aiming a chopstick at the chief clerk. Your adopted mother was standing behind them, her fingers clenched around a pot of stewed fish. "There'll be war again," you heard him say. You stood at the front door as still as you could. Was this one of those times when children should not be seen, much less heard? You waited. Your father, the chief clerk, looked up finally and beckoned. "Your blood father's here to visit," he said, pointing to the unfamiliar man beside him, pale and square in black farmer's clothing. "You must greet him." So, this was the commander, the swamp fighter the adults in the house whispered about.
Alright, so anyone has any
Do you have any
thoughts or-
comments, thoughts, questions? Some of you haven't read the book, but some of you have.
We don't want to steal all the beans.
You don't have to spill all the beans, you can ask
Why the
questions.
title, Gianna?
Huh? Why the
title?
title? I had always wanted to call the book Heart Bones, because I felt that the heart hasn't got bones, right? But life can turn your heart to bones because life is so hard. And so there is a little bit here about this. You heard your mother draw your sister close and stroke her hair, uncaring that your sister's tears would be wetting her grey silk trousers. "It's a woman's life, you must bear it, you'll learn," she said to your sister. She didn't explain how life could turn even a heart to bone. And I know that your wife said that this man has a terrible life. Who would want to live his life? And, well, his life would turn his heart to bones. But the issue is that when life turns your heart to bones, then what I have is this other thing from Hemingway in A Farewell to Arms, because this book is very much about a farewell to arms. You have to say goodbye to your war in the end. And what Hemingway says is that life breaks everyone. And if you don't let it break you, then you'll die, basically. So you need life to break you, and therefore the heart bones have to break. The reason why it wasn't called Heart Bones, and why it's called As the Heart Bones Break, is Miss Mindy here.
It wasn't us.
It was Miss Mindy. Miss Mindy said, "Hard bones is 2 words. It's not nice looking on the page." See?
It wasn't just that. It was
See, look, 2 words and then my name is 2 words. So cannot. So she said, odd number. So
That was
odd
from the
number.
designer.
Yes, the designer, not Miss
Yeah.
Mindy. So odd numbers. So we then had this very long title, which is actually from our favorite songwriter, Trần Công Sao, who is the poet laureate of Vietnam. And his song is actually Cúi xuống nghe tim rạng vỡ, which is bend low and listen to the heart shatter. So it becomes As the Heart Bones Break. And you do have to, if you think about that, you have to bend low when you read this book, because it is, you have to give respect to people who survive wars, right? No matter what. So that's why you bend low. And so that's it.
And it's also a level of momentum to say that if you just say heart bones, you need to know what happens to the heart bones. Why heart bones firstly? It's a journey. Yeah,
That's
and
right, it's as the.
so
Yes.
something is happening, and there's the idea that there is movement, there is change, and there is change that's hard to get through.
Did you just make this up recently? All I remembered was odd numbers, please.
No, we was a bet between my husband, between Don and I, as to how we were reading into the title after we read the book. Why this title? And he analytical as he is, the heart doesn't have bone. And I said, well, you can't look at
That's what
analyze it that
Yes.
explicitly. You have to read deep into it.
And you just know
but the
heart bones, yeah.
explanation of as the and break.
Yes.
It's a big difference.
It's
between
as
just
your
bones.
heart breaks.
So it's a journey
Yeah.
of his suffering, ups and downs, and in the end,
It's a
it's
bit
not always a
palatable.
happy ending. Or in the end, yeah.
Well, he lays it down. You have to put the
Yeah.
bones down, is what it is. Yeah. So he manages to put the bones down. Yeah.
Well, I had an interesting insight into how the Americans have dealt with their survival when my granddaughter, who's in a high school, or was in a high school in America, in the course of some discussion in class, and said something about the Americans having lost the Vietnam War, and she thought, wait, that's a war the Americans won.
Your granddaughter
My
said
ch-
this.
the teacher said this. So my daughter went to see the principal of the school and said, that's ridiculous. I mean, did you see the Viet Cong driving tanks? And so on. And the principal said, well, it was one of those wars where neither side exactly won. Now, this is incredible, but this is obviously the way they're dealing with the surviving of a war.
But it's very interesting that you said that, because there is an American Vietnamese writer called Andrew Lam, and he is quite well known, and he went to America when he was about 7 or 8.
He's Vietnamese.
He's Vietnamese American, and he's the son of a southern general. In fact, the general who controlled the northernmost province, who
Because he's got a
let,
Cantonese
who
name.
let, no, it's
His name is
Vietnamese.
Chinese,
Yes,
but it's a Cantonese.
yeah. He's the son of the General Lam Quang Thi, who was defending the northern side and actually let the people in. And so Andrew Lam went back to visit Vietnam when he was about 35, but for the first time. And the immigration officer at the communist immigration officer said, "Oh, so when did you leave Vietnam?" And he used the South Vietnamese term. He said, "Oh, I left Vietnam when we lost the country." Mất nước. He said, I left Vietnam when we lost the country. And then he goes, then he changed his mind. He said, I left the Vietnam during liberation, giải phóng, okay? And then the immigration officer looked at him and laughed, and he smiled, and he said, who is to say who won or who lost, because you live in America? Which is a better life than the immigration officer had, you see. And so I find that very telling.
So that question has been debated over the years. it's just a perspective. Like after live, if you ask my father, he will have a different opinion. My father will have a different opinion. My grandparents will have a different opinion, and I will have a different opinion because, you know, a friend of mine here in Singapore, who's an American expat, asked me, "Do you feel the war was a positive thing for you?" I mean, it's not about who lost or who won. My generation is, if we did leave, would we have this life that we had in the U.S.? So for me, it would be like if we were still in Vietnam, it would be completely different, I think. So, but if you ask my grandparents, you know, they're hardcore, you know, against everything. They lost everything, their money, everything when the government changed. So I think who won and who lost is all relative, I guess, depending on what your experience is as a result of the war.
Right, and his grandfather never left.
Yeah, and my grandfather didn't leave, and he was actually.
I mean, when
With
you're
the French,
completely outside it, and I'm a Singaporean but also English by birth, when you're completely outside it, you see the pictures of the people clinging, the Americans clinging to the steps to get into the plane and everything. So you get the picture that it was clear the Americans lost, you know.
Yes.
I agree with you from your point of view, but from the outside it looks like the Americans lost that war.
Well, I think they
Well,
left
history.
anyway. They left.
Yeah.
They left. Let's not say, you know,
Not by
maybe
choice.
they left by choice. They withdrew. So maybe they might have lost. I don't know, you
History
know.
documented,
Yeah.
I think
But
that,
I mean, if
that
the
they
Vietcong
lost.
Yeah,
tanks
that
were
is
coming down
that is the
Saigon
book,
Main Street.
history documented. Yeah.
I mean, if you say there are two sides, you know, who left and who stayed, they left. So yes.
It's a very controversial war.
Understatement.
I
As you can
think.
see, it affected many people.
Yeah.
And this book actually is a good chronological kind of description of that complexity through this character.
It's
At
a
least-
controversial book too, right?
Yeah, quite controversial. Maybe he picked the wrong side. I don't know.
Maybe there is no right side.
There is no wrong
Yeah,
or right.
but-
Just like there
There
is
was no
no
right
who
side.
won, or that's how
No, but
fuzzy.
as bad as as Holly thinks he is actually a man with consequences. What I meant by that is he knew there will be consequences for what he has done. The man has a conscience.
Yeah, he had a conscience. Yeah.
For me, that's the key, right?
No, not that he was a bad person, but he lived a really struggling, conflicted, multi-personal, personality.
I think he's very human.
For anyone who's gone through that.
I
war.
guess what I wanted to say is it's very hard to decide which side is wrong or right, because the opposite character of this character is his adopted brother, and they are both actually very close. And his adopted brother has always been on the southern side. And I think there is actually a section where after just after the bullets, you know, when we had the boy shape that was burned, and actually both he and his brother could not decide who was actually responsible for the boy being burnt, because the brother was responsible in a different way. And he and his brother are very close, and they sacrificed for each other, and they actually were always on different sides, and the brother knew what he was doing and he knew what his brother was doing, and yet, okay, this is the part. All right. It was at the time Locke and Hoong were in Nha Trang. Locke is the brother. It's his childhood hero. Locke and Hoong were in Nha Trang in their own little house by the sea. Locke heading a propaganda unit, Hoong tending to a girl and 3 younger boys, with one more on the way. It was the finishing touch to your good fortune in Nha Trang. It was like old times with Locke, except that now he could no longer play the anti-war ballads you'd both loved in Saigon. And now both of you were more careful with your conversation. It would not do if the two of you became too knowledgeable about each other's activities. At this stage of the war, many northern squads were already hiding in the surrounding hamlets. As part of his propaganda and pacification role, it was Locke's job to seek out and destroy the hidden clusters. He was your brother, and he had 6 rice bowls to fill. You couldn't blame him. Your responsibility was to keep the large northern units in the jungles hidden, blah, 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 okay? Okay, if Locke knew about what you were doing, he didn't interfere. You were his brother. And I think that's the whole thing, isn't it? Yeah.
If the French had never come, would Vietnam have been 2 countries, North and South, rather than one because the French put them together?
No, it would have been one country because the king was in Hue, which was in central Vietnam. Yeah. The more interesting question is if President Diem had not been assassinated by John F. Kennedy, which also is very controversial. People do not know if that was true, but I think more of the evidence now than before suggested that the Kennedys, that the CIA did assassinate Diem. And there's a new book out to that effect, you know, and that led to the coup upon the coup upon the coup, and sort of the real instability because they had thought that Diem was too dictatorial. But you and I are citizens of this country that have had only one prime minister for 30 years, and part of it was quite helpful. This is a Singaporean perspective, yes?
Your characters, are they people you meet?
They are everybody I have met, but they've changed. You know, you and I know a very fat venture capitalist. He isn't Chinese and he does not work in Vietnam. I also knew a banker, you know, who worked in Vietnam and was very good with money, like this person in the book, yes. So,
The main character.
Tong, the main
It's
character.
an accumulation of many.
It's
people's
accumulation of many people's lives. I will say that I started the book. Actually, Tom is mostly quite imaginary, strangely enough. I had started the book wanting to write a story about my husband's life because my husband was adopted and his blood father was really a Viet Minh guerrilla, and his adopted father was really a civil servant who worked for the French. And they were really married to 2 sisters and they were best friends. Okay, and so this is why the government quarters in Bac Liu were never attacked by the Viet Minh because my husband's mother had died, and therefore my husband was living with his aunt at the French civil service. But I think what happened was, as I wrote the story, it was very boring because my father-in-law had actually come back from the swamps in 1954, and so there wasn't much of a story. It was all very one-sided. It was a South Vietnamese story. And then I read, I make a dedication here, I read a novel by Marty Limbach called The Man from Saigon, and it was about an American woman who had fallen in, who is captured by the Viet Cong and goes on a jungle march with her photographer who is a Vietnamese spy. And then from there I read a book about Pham Xuong An, who was the Times headliner in the 70s, and he actually was a 4-star communist general. He was a spy for the Viet Cong. And I said, oh, this is what I shall do. The father will never come back, and he will always be a communist, the blood father, and my hero will be a spy. And then there will be an additional character who's a journalist, like Pham Xuong An, you know, who becomes a 3rd father. And so now you've got a triangle, and you've got this poor man running between the 3. And then the story suddenly became so rich. And then he, you know, because he was running between the 3, he ended up doing all these things, and so it became much more imagined. Yeah, and then all the wonderful scenes I had about my husband's childhood all got chucked knocked out. So there are no more scenes. The only real scene from his childhood is actually the one where he comes home from school and his father is there and he's supposed to call his father Ba, and he can't because he goes, I already got a father. Why do I have to call this person father, this person who's arrived? Yeah.
It was very, very thick when it first came in.
Yeah, it was 150,000 words and now it's 90. And actually it's still very, very thick, you know. Took you, how long did it take you to finish?
It took me several days because I didn't read in one go.
Yeah.
Usually we can read a book in 1 or 2 days.
Yeah, so actually it's still quite thick, yeah.
Why did you choose such a dictatorial voice?
You.
Yes. Why you? Because you're talking to Trump as if he's in the third person. It's a very unusual choice of a voice or author.
I don't know how many versions we had. Do you remember?
Yeah, I just
We had 3 at least.
Sorry?
First one was very heavy.
Yeah, you is a very unusual voice for authors to write you know, as a
Yeah.
protagonist. Either it's omnipresent voice or you write
But
in the first
it's-
person.
Is
Well,
it you were saying
It's this thing is talking. This thing is a piece of bone that has no tact, you know, it just talks. But I think we started as third person and then he was very distant as a third person because you know he's not a particularly sympathetic character, Tom. I mean he tells lies, he cheats on his wife, you know, I mean he's not like he has a conscience, you know, he does everything because his life is like that, but the fact that we had him as a he made it very difficult and unsympathetic. The Americans like the I, and actually if we sell the US version it will be an I because the American beta readers, the people whom we send it to, could not go beyond like page 15 with a U. But no British, Australian or Asian reader complained about it. They would say, why did you do it? But they didn't complain. They would just read. But Americans would just get like to page 15 and go, I can't do it anymore. It sounds like my mother's telling me off. And so it's something about being American. Not Asian Americans, white Americans could not read the U. And the U was really because I actually wanted, he doesn't know his own story, yes? So I wanted somebody to tell it to him. So it was like, I'm telling you this, I'm whispering you these secrets of your life.
Did you say anywhere there's the bracelet talking?
Yes, right at the beginning, yes.
It's very.
We just
it's
said
not
so.
Obvious.
It's not obvious. It
So
says, there is a circlet you carry close to your heart, a memento from someone who knew you the instant you were made. In its silence is your story. So this is the narrator. But having said that, in Vietnamese, you wouldn't write in the first voice because it would be like Chinese. It'd be doi doi doi, me, I. So you couldn't. And then you couldn't really, you could use a he, but it would actually sound distant but more intimate if I'm saying, I will tell you this story, you know, I think, yeah? If you thought about it in Vietnamese, right, you couldn't really say tôi đi I when I did, it would just be too rude. Yeah.
I haven't read the book, but from this conversation you've been having, it just sort of struck me. It's very interesting how you've taken the bangle.
Yes.
Because, I mean, life is generally about, and even stories, about like coming full circle.
Yes.
Closure.
Yes.
However destructive it might be.
Yeah.
So for me, that was really interesting in this.
And it begins and ends with a bangle. No spoilers, but it also ends with a bangle being passed on. Because sometimes we don't know. I mean, I don't really know much about my mother-in-law, but I mean, I got this as my wedding gift, and really it was the only thing they had left to give me, you know, as a wedding present. I mean, I didn't get a dowry or anything. And then I gave it to my daughter. I've just stolen it back. And I suppose she'll give it to her children. So the stories remain even though you don't know what they are. Yeah. We finished?
This is your first book?
No, this is, my books are there. Oh, you know, this is a bookshop. We have to thank the bookstore for letting us have be here. So this is my third book. My first, I write about Southeast Asia. My first book, which long, I think you will like actually, is called Learning to Fly, and it's about the jungle and trees, and it's about a couple who are also morally ambiguous, but they love trees, okay? It's about a morally ambiguous couple who love trees. And it's really about how I love trees. And then the second one is called Singapore Women Represented. It's a collection of essays. It's a social history of Singapore. And I co-edited and contributed it with Constance Singer. Anne didn't write anything for
Oh, yes,
that.
I
You
did.
Yes, what was the social, being a British wife, yes. Anne contributed to that too, yes. So
Well, you
it
might
is.
not know it because
I
that
did.
weird. I have to say. Well, anyhow, let's not discuss that here.
We'll buy that. You could tell me about how, but it is there. So that's a social history from of Singapore from the women's perspective, and this is my third book. And prior to all this, I worked at the RAND Corporation, which actually published the Pentagon Papers, and so I wrote a lot of non-fiction. Yeah.
So what inspired you to write this?
I have been a daughter-in-law of the DS. I started by I wanted to write about my husband's life and family for my children. But it was quite boring, I mean, it just like not that interesting. not, so then what actually triggered it was about 2.5 years ago, when I read about The Spy. So I thought the book was so good. And then the thing that really triggered it was actually a comment that somebody made about that book, which said, there is a hole in the center of this story. We do not know about the main character, the Vietnamese spy, okay, the photographer. And I was going, that's because it was written by a white person. They can't. But I know about, I'm sure I know more about Vietnamese character than she does. So that is the second trigger. Yeah. But a lot of the material, actually, most of the material for the memoir is gone. It's all been chucked out.
Not by us.
Not by you.
Audrey.
I edited it
she
out,
did.
yeah, because it didn't go with the story anymore, yeah. Right?